October 1992. At the Unforgiven premiere, Clint Eastwood suddenly walks out of his own movie, leaving twos and Hollywood elites confused. Security finds him crying alone on the theater steps. The reason became cinema legend. Here is the story. Hollywood's toughest man was sitting alone on the marble steps of the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in a 3,000 tuxedo, quietly crying while his greatest triumph played to thunderous applause inside. What drove Clint Eastwood from his own premiere that October night in 1992 became one of the most whispered legends in cinema history. It was supposed to be Clint's coronation. Unforgiven had already been declared a masterpiece by critics who'd seen early screenings. The film was being hailed as a meditation on violence, aging, and redemption that would redefine the Western genre forever. At 62, Clint had created what many considered his finest work as both actor and director. The Dorothy Chandler Pavilion was packed with Hollywood royalty. Steven Spielberg, Jack Nicholson, Meryl Streep, and every major studio head had come to honor Clint's achievement. The red carpet had been a parade of congratulations and predictions of Academy Awards. This was Clint's night, his moment of vindication as a serious filmmaker. Inside the theater, the audience was completely absorbed in the film. They'd just watched William Money, Clint's character, transform from a gentle pig farmer back into the ruthless killer he'd once been. The saloon massacre scene had left the audience stunned with its brutal honesty about violence and its consequences. Now they were watching one of the film's most powerful moments. Money had just killed the corrupt sheriff Little Bill, played by Gene Hackman. As he stands over the body, he delivers the line that would become one of cinema's most quoted, "It's a hell of a thing, killing a man. You take away all he's got and all he's ever gonna have." The audience was riveted. This wasn't the mythic violence of traditional Westerns. This was violence as it really was, ugly and final and haunted by consequences. It was exactly the kind of honest filmmaking that had made Clint's reputation as a director. But in the middle of that acclaimed scene, in the moment when the audience was most absorbed, Clint Eastwood quietly stood up from his aisle seat and walked out of the theater. At first, nobody noticed. The film continued. The audience remained absorbed. It wasn't until the lights came up for intermission that people began asking where Clint had gone. His seat in the front row was empty, his place at the center of his own celebration abandoned. David Webb, the film's producer, assumed Clint had stepped out for air or to avoid the inevitable intermission crowd of well-wishers and congratulations. But when Clint didn't return for the second half, Webb became concerned. Theater security was quietly asked to locate Mr. Eastwood. They checked the lobby, the bar, the VIP areas. Nothing. Finally, a young usher named Tommy Martinez thought to check outside the main entrance. What he found would stay with him for the rest of his life. Clint was sitting on the marble steps that led up to the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking slightly. The famous tuxedo was wrinkled from sitting on the cold stone, and Hollywood's toughest man was crying. Tommy had worked dozens of premieres and award shows. He'd seen celebrities drunk, angry, and making scenes, but he'd never seen anything like this. The man who'd played the man with no name, Dirty Harry, and countless other tough guys, was broken down on the steps of his own triumph. "Mr. Eastwood," Tommy said quietly, approaching carefully. "Sir, are you okay?" Clint looked up, and Tommy saw something in his eyes that didn't match any role he'd ever played. There was pain there, deep and old and raw. Not the kind of pain that came from professional setbacks or Hollywood politics. Something much more personal. "I'm sorry," Clint said, his voice rough. "I just needed some air." "The movie's still playing, sir. Everyone's wondering where you are." Clint nodded but made no move to get up. He looked out at the Los Angeles skyline, at the lights stretching toward the horizon. "Tommy," he said, reading the young man's name tag. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Sir, do you think a man can change? Really change? Not just pretend to change?" It wasn't the kind of question Tommy expected from a movie star at his own premiere. "I don't know, Mr. Eastwood. I guess I hope so." Clint was quiet for a long moment. Then he began to talk, not to Tommy specifically, but to the night air, to himself, to whatever ghosts had driven him from that theater. When I was 12 years old, Clint said, my father took me hunting. First time. I was so excited, thought it would make me feel like a man, you know? We tracked this deer for hours in the woods near our house in Oakland. Beautiful animal. When we finally cornered it, my father handed me the rifle. Tommy sat down on the steps beside him, sensing this was a story that needed to be heard. I aimed at that deer, and it looked right at me, right into my eyes. And I saw something there, some kind of recognition, like it knew what was about to happen. But my father was watching, and I wanted so badly to make him proud. Clint's hands were shaking now, the same hands that had drawn countless guns in countless westerns. So I pulled the trigger, and that deer didn't die clean. It stumbled, fell, tried to get back up. My father had to finish it off. And when he did, he looked at me and said, "That's what killing really looks like, son. It's not clean, and it's not heroic. And you never forget it." Tommy realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. Clint Eastwood, the icon of masculine stoicism, was sharing his deepest wound with a teenage usher on the steps of a movie theater. I spent the next 50 years playing men who killed without consequence, Clint continued. Men who drew faster and shot straighter and walked away clean. But tonight, watching that scene, hearing myself say that line about taking away everything a man's got and ever gonna have, I saw that deer again. I saw my father's face. I saw every character I ever played who made violence look easy. He turned to Tommy, and the young man saw something that would change his understanding of movie stars forever. Clint wasn't crying because he was sad. He was crying because he was finally, at 62 years old, reconciling the man he'd become with the boy who'd pulled that trigger. "The thing is," Clint said, "I made this movie to be honest about violence, to show that it has consequences, that it changes you. But sitting in there, watching myself on that big screen, I realized I'd been carrying that 12-year-old boy around with me this whole time. Every tough guy I played was trying to prove to my father that I could kill clean, kill without it mattering." Inside the theater, Unforgiven was reaching its conclusion. The audience was experiencing what critics would later call one of the most honest examinations of violence in cinema history. But its creator was outside, finally confronting the violence in his own past. "My father died 10 years ago," Clint said. "I never told him about the nightmares I had after that hunting trip. Never told him that every gun I drew in every movie, I was thinking about that deer. Never told him that all those tough guy roles were just me trying to become someone who could kill without feeling it." Tommy didn't know what to say. He was 17 years old, working part-time at a movie theater, and Hollywood's biggest star was sharing his deepest secrets with him. "Mr. Eastwood," Tommy said finally, "maybe the point is that you did feel it. Maybe that's what makes you different from all those characters you played." Clint looked at him with something approaching surprise. "You think? I mean, if you didn't care about that deer, you wouldn't be out here crying about it 50 years later, right? And if you didn't care about violence having consequences, you wouldn't have made a movie like Unforgiven." For the first time that night, Clint smiled slightly. "You're pretty smart for a kid. My mom says I think too much. Don't ever stop." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Inside, the movie was ending to what sounded like thunderous applause. Soon, the audience would come looking for Clint, wanting to congratulate him on his masterpiece. "I should go back in," Clint said, standing and adjusting his tuxedo. "People will be wondering." "Mr. Eastwood," Tommy said, "for what it's worth, I think your father would be proud of you tonight. Not because you made a tough guy movie, but because you made an honest one." Clint looked at the young man for a long moment, then nodded. "Tommy, you ever want to work in movies, you call me. Anybody who can see that clearly at 17 is going to go places." As they walked back toward the theater entrance, Tommy asked, "Will you be okay going back in there?" "Yeah," Clint said, and for the first time all night, his voice sounded like the confident director who'd created a masterpiece. "I think I finally understand what this movie was really about." They returned to the theater just as the credits rolled, and the audience erupted in a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Clint took his place on stage for the Q&A session that followed, answering questions about his artistic choices and his vision for the film. But Tommy, watching from the back of the theater, saw something the audience didn't. Every time Clint talked about the film's themes of redemption and consequence, he seemed to be speaking not just as the director, but as a man who'd finally made peace with his own past. Unforgiven went on to win 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director for Clint. It's now considered one of the greatest films ever made, a definitive statement on violence and its aftermath. But for those who know the legend of that premiere night, the film represents something deeper. It's the story of a man who spent 50 years playing characters, trying to escape the consequences of violence, only to create his masterpiece when he finally stopped running from his own. Tommy Martinez never did call Clint about working in movies. He became a teacher instead, but he never forgot that night on the steps. He would tell his students that sometimes the most important conversations happen not in classrooms or offices, but in unexpected moments when someone's guard is down and their humanity shows through. Years later, when Clint was asked about the making of Unforgiven, he would say it was the most personal film he'd ever made. He never mentioned the breakdown on the theater steps, but those who worked with him noticed something different in his later films. The violence became even more considered, more weighted with consequence. The legend of that night reminds us that even our toughest heroes carry wounds, and that sometimes our greatest triumphs come not from conquering others, but from finally confronting ourselves. This is the story of how Hollywood's most stoic man found his humanity on the steps of his own success, and how a young usher witnessed the moment when a lifetime of tough guy performances gave way to one moment of honest vulnerability. Have you ever had a moment when success felt hollow because it couldn't heal an old wound? Share a time when you had to confront something you'd been carrying for years in the comments. Sometimes our biggest triumphs reveal our deepest wounds. That night, Clint discovered his masterpiece wasn't just about characters finding redemption. When did you realize success couldn't fix an old pain? Subscribe for more untold legends.